Colossus is the most advanced lineup optimizer in daily fantasy sports. Lock and exclude players. Adjust player exposure to reduce risk of injury or poor performance. Customize individual projections or upload your own projections. Generate hundreds of optimal lineups in seconds. Name and save the best lineups. Create winning lineups for the top sites like DraftKings and FanDuel for free at dailyfantasycafe.com.
Hello and welcome once again to Week 3, the Slate Breakdown. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Denny Carter at CD Carter 13, and we're talking about the landscape of the week, which changed dramatically off of one player yesterday, who I'm sure we'll get to here in a few minutes, but still not anything certain with that either. So some uncertainty, but you've got a really good point on that. So when we get to that, definitely going to help you out with some ideas, because those of us and you and whoever else has Marshawn Lynch in their Thursday games, like we were talking before the show, that could be an unfortunate situation, or maybe not. But we'll go ahead and start off here. The first game on Sunday, Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals, a 45-point total, and this is actually one of the higher totals in the week because we don't have any 55, 52 games like we had the last few weeks. So seems like a small total, really isn't that small. And the Ravens defense looked awful last week. We saw everyone had Jeremy Hill, who was a popular play. He got benched for fumbling. Giovanni Bernard came in and was effective. So what's your main target here? Are you looking at either defense or are you looking at running backs? What's your target here?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned in the Slate Breakdown this week that Andy Dalton might make a kind of a sneaky play. It doesn't so much have to do with his hot start, although that doesn't hurt. It's more that the Ravens defense is not the same without Terrell Suggs. I mean, I think that we saw that last week. We saw that their secondary was exposed with because they had very little pass rush on David Carr. I always say that, Derek Carr.
Yeah.
Don't play David Carr this weekend. So
or any weekend ever.
So with time, Dalton has been good in the past. I'm not sure if I'm playing him in cash lineups, but I think that he could kind of make a sneaky high upside play in this one.
Yeah, and like we've mentioned before, he's been doing a good job of spreading the ball around. So none of the Bengals' targets seem like elite, must plays, but you got Eifert's involved and Green and even Marvin Jones now. So that's great for Andy Dalton. It kind of takes away the opportunities for him to make mistakes and force the ball in where it doesn't belong.
Right, and I want to mention just real quick, Crockett Gilmore, tight end for the Ravens, obviously became somewhat of a household name last week in fantasy circles because he went ballistic and was top scoring tight end for the week. I see his volume kind of taking an uptick here because the Bengals corners are really good and the Bengals secondary is really solid. And the Ravens pass catchers are very limited. I mean, Bashard Perriman again is not going to play, so you have Steve Smith and you have no one else. So typically Cincinnati's pretty good against tight ends, but I could see Gilmore getting 8 targets, right around there in this game. In a game that I don't think the Ravens are going to be able to run very well. And Gilmore makes for a great red zone target. He's a huge guy. And I think that you've seen the Ravens recognize that, that he's probably their best red zone target. He's still really cheap out there. And I think that he's much more now, I think, than like a flyer, which, he's been for the first 2 weeks. I think he's more than that now.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like you said, with the Bengals, as long as Vontaze Burfict is out, obviously that defense isn't going to be quite as good against tight ends. So as far as anyone else, what's your take on the Justin Forsett, Lorenzo Taliaferro situation? Because I know that's one. People were looking to Forsett. Some people have already written him off.
It's dicey. It's just dicey. He doesn't have, and I guess it's not shocking. I mean, you're talking about a journeyman, older type running back. And he had a nice secure role last year, but it seems that he's not going to get every touch out of the backfield like many thought going into the season. Although in Mark Trestman's offense, a pass catching back always has appeal.
Yeah.
So that's something I try to keep in mind and I have fitted Forsett into a couple lineups because he's still, especially on DraftKings, he's still pretty cheap.
Yeah, and with that full point PPR, I mean, he doesn't have to have a huge game to pay off his salary.
Right.
So, next one, depending on who you ask, maybe it's interesting. A couple of years ago, we probably would have thrown up looking at these two teams in 42-point total, but we got the Browns against the Raiders. Looks like Josh McCown's going to be back as a starter. We saw Derek Carr and the Raiders explode last week. Huge performance there. So Travis Benjamin's been the sexy play, I guess, because he was on all the $1 million winning rosters. But we also look at the target numbers. We see the stat numbers, and I've seen a lot of people just come out and make he was a bad play. You got lucky. So what's your take on Travis Benjamin? If you have 1,000 lineups, how many is Travis Benjamin in?
1,000. He's in. I guess he's in a couple, maybe out of 1,000, because he's their deep threat. So if they go deep, he's going to be the guy. I don't know. He ran 9 pass routes last week. That's such a crazy low number. I think it's hard to underestimate how fluky that is. It would be one. Honestly, it would be one thing if he was running. If he ran like 20, 30 pass routes and he caught a bomb. Then I could maybe get behind him in some fashion, but no, I think it's point chasing. As Evan Silva said this week, it's a donkey move.
Yeah, and it's hard to disagree. I mean, you got to look at the advanced numbers. You can't just look at the game logs and see that, and you obviously don't expect him to return a punt for a touchdown either. So it's almost one of those situations where you see like he's like the decoy. You bring him in and you just know he's getting the ball. It's one of those situations, and I'm not a fan. I don't feel bad about not having him last week, and I'm not going to have him this week.
No, me neither. I think on the other side of the ball, no matter what you think about the Raiders' offense here, and by the way, the Raiders looked good last week. Last season, they let opposing defenses score 5.5 fantasy points against them at home in Oakland. On the road, that number rose to 14.5. So the Raiders and especially Carr are very bad on the road usually, very turnover prone. So I am playing the Browns in a lot of spots. The Browns defense. McCown makes me nervous, honestly. I mean, it makes me more nervous than if Manziel still had the job, because he's the kind of guy who could put the defense in a really unenviable spot, which is why I don't have a ton of Browns defense, but I do have a little. And Latavius Murray is I think a surprisingly safe play no matter what the game script is here, because he's been coming out of the backfield and catching passes, and I think and he was a really good pass catcher in college, which I think kind of went under the radar this summer, including myself. I mean, I didn't realize it, but we kind of thought Roy Halou would be this guy eating into Murray's value when the Raiders are down by a lot, but it's not the case, and I don't think it'll be the case this week.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Browns defense that hasn't been a good run defense for the last couple of weeks, and you put it well in your article here. You said, don't get cute. No reason to add any extra players this game. It's the lowest total, and it's just two bad offenses, and I'm not overreacting to the Raiders either. Next up, the Panthers and the Saints. Obviously, injury news in this one. Drew Brees listed out. I feel like we're not getting the whole story with the injury. They said maybe he was going to play. We kind of knew he wasn't going to play this week. We don't know the severity of it, but obviously you throw Luke McCown, you throw in anyone named McCown into an offense, and that offense already looked terrible with Drew Brees. There's not a chance I'm playing any Saints players this week.
No, how can you? I mean, I don't have Luke McCown's numbers in front of me, but it's something like in his last 3 starts, he's thrown 0 touchdowns and 5 picks. Has 5 turnovers. I mean, it's bleak. It's really bleak for the New Orleans offense, and I think it makes the Panthers. I said on Twitter yesterday, outside of the Seahawks this week against the Bears, I like the Panthers against this Saints team. They're at home. They're favored. McCown starting. That offensive line is very shaky. I really love Carolina's defense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense there. So another guy here, Cam Newton, is a guy that a lot of people are talking about. I've heard some people rumoring him in cash games. I'm not sure I'm necessarily going to go that route, but he's in a good spot because this is a terrible defense. This is a defense that struggled against Tampa Bay, who, I mean, obviously small sample size. It's a new offense, new quarterback, but I'm not a believer that's a good offense by any stretch. So Cam Newton, though, a guy who gives you a nice high floor because he does run the ball and he takes goal line carries, and he doesn't have a lot of great targets, but you still got Greg Olsen, and you have enough that he can produce at a price tag, which you mentioned. He's not even in the top 10 price-wise on FanDuel. Yeah,
that's surprising. I'm not playing him in cash games. Typically, the rushing quarterbacks are they're just so iffy in cash games. But he has rushed a lot this year. 24 rushes for 111 yards and a touchdown through 2 games. That's hopeful, and I think that has a lot to do with not having anyone to throw to besides Greg Olsen. And Ted Ginn is their number one. I will say that Devin Funchess might be like a throw-in, toss-in tournament guy this week because he's expected to get more snaps. And if he does what he does, which is go up for a jump ball, he can meet value very easily. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and like you mentioned with Ted Ginn, I mean, as a native of Columbus, Ohio now, I watched this guy in college, and yes, he's an electric threat, but he's got rocks for hands. It's almost like his hands are closed when he tries to catch the ball. So decent performance over the past few weeks, but as someone who watched him try to be a wide receiver in college, the guy has terrible hands, and I'm not putting my money on a wide receiver that doesn't have good hands. Yeah,
it amazes me that did he go first overall to Miami?
Yeah, I think he was ninth pick or something like that.
Oh, ninth pick. Yeah, God, that's gotta be one of the worst picks of all time.
Yeah, I mean that's about as bad as what was it? The Jets took Mike Nugent, I think second round, third round.
Oh, yeah,
kicker. So yeah, a lot of Buckeyes getting overvalued in the draft, definitely.
Right.
Next up, Cowboys and the Falcons. This one obviously a lot different than it would have been last week or even the week before, especially. No Des Bryant, no Tony Romo. You've got Brandon Weeden, who, of course, he comes out and says he thinks he can be successful because who wouldn't? You got to say that. You've got to have confidence. And it is a bad Falcons secondary, but at the same time, it's still Brandon Weeden. We need to temper our expectations for the guy that the Browns didn't want. So you've got Julio Jones in this one, and he's the obvious play. If you're going to play one guy from this game, it's got to be Julio Jones.
Yeah, and the one thing about the Julio play for me is, because you're deciding, for me at least, I'm deciding between him and Antonio Brown. Yep. You can't have both unless you skimp on everything else. So I tend to lean Brown because the Cowboys obviously really want to bleed the clock, control, get that ball control offense going, and that means, and we've seen this with the Cowboys over and over again over the past couple of years, that means that the other team gets very few offensive snaps. And, not that the Cowboys secondary is intimidating, and Julio Jones is fantastic. I'm not saying anything about him. But that's the one scenario that kind of freaks me out a little bit on that front. But, yeah, Weeden makes the Falcons' defense viable, even though, like you said, their secondary is pretty bad. But, Weeden locks onto targets. And doesn't, not known for his reading of defenses. So I like the Falcons' defense as kind of a tournament defense.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense because we saw, obviously this was somewhat a product last week of the Eagles' offense just being horrible, but we saw Jordan Matthews not have a catch until the fourth quarter. So obviously Julio Jones on a complete different level than Jordan Matthews, but this is still a creative scheme that they have where maybe they try to force the ball out of Julio Jones' hands into, Roddy White, Leonard Hankerson, whoever it may be. So I'm not saying I'm not going to play him, but I still like Antonio Brown more. I mean, what is it, 33 straight games, 5-50? I mean, it's hard not to just trust that production.
I know. It's just Lock City. I mean, just plug him.
And that offense is just incredible right now. So it's hard. But we'll get to him in a minute. Enough gushing about Antonio Brown on the other game, I guess. Next up, the Houston Texans and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Bucs have a whopping team total of 17 points. And 41-point total, as you know, one of the lowest on the weeks here. So no Arian Foster again. Now we've got DeAndre Hopkins. Looks like he's coming. He was questionable. Now looks like he's going to be in. So he's obviously a viable target. He got shut down last week, but that was more due to a tough matchup, which he doesn't have in this one. Not even remotely tough. So for me, I'm not playing any Buccaneers players. I don't know why I would be anyway. So, obviously, DeAndre Hopkins. Is there anybody else you're looking at in this game aside from Hopkins?
On Living the Stream this week, we talked about Ryan Mallett as somewhat of a viable play. I mean, he had 58 throws last week and only had 244 yards, which is a very Steph Fordian line. But the Tampa secondary is giving up a 68.5% completion percentage so far this year, and that's actually almost identical to their 2014 numbers. So that's not a fluke, and that's a very high number. I mean, that's in the depending on how you look at it, bottom five, basically, secondary for completion percentage. And so, Mallett, I think, will have to throw against a bad secondary. So, with Hopkins out there, without Hopkins, I wouldn't even talk about Mallett. In fact, I feel dirty talking about him as is. But with Hopkins out there, you just maybe that Hopkins, Mallett Hopkins stack does something. I actually kind of do like that stack.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like DeAndre Hopkins, maybe the way that I perceive it is he's the best receiver that nobody's afraid of, and also that nobody plays enough. So I mean, he's a very good receiver. He's not quite the elite level yet, but I mean, he's getting there, and we saw that in week 1. I mean, the guy, he was literally the only option in that week, scored a couple touchdowns and was a big factor. So wouldn't be surprised to see that again this week. Next up, the Vikings and the Chargers, 45-point total here. This one's going to be an interesting one because we've seen guys like Danny Woodhead be a popular value play because he just fits perfectly with Phillip Rivers in this offense in the short passing game. Then you've got Melvin Gordon, of course, who's got 34 touches over the first 2 weeks. Hasn't done a ton with them, but that's exactly what San Diego has wanted and needed, is a consistent running game. And then on the Vikings side, nobody really stands out aside from Adrian Peterson, but do you really need anyone else to stand out aside from Adrian Peterson? Because, I mean, Giovanni Bernard ran all over this defense last week, and he's nowhere near the class of runner that Peterson is.
No, yeah, and I think that AP is a pretty safe play. I mean, he was very close to having a giant week 2 line and just kept fumbling at the goal line, almost comically. I mean, how many times? Like 2 or 3 times.
He just won the challenge.
It was amazing. It was incredible. So yeah, I'm not too. I mean, you have to pay a premium, of course. Talking about Gordon, I don't think that last week, I wrote about this in the Slate breakdown, I don't think that we can look at last week and, the Vikings shutting down the Detroit run game. I don't think we can look at that and say, oh, well, Vikings, righted the wrongs that they had on the opening Monday night when Carlos Hyde, ate their souls. So I think that that's going to be a target, a run defense that we should target. And, Gordon ripped off, 3 or 4 really nice runs against a really good Cincinnati defense last week. So I could see him, continuing that. I can see them, feeding him if and when they get the lead. And I know that the Vikings are favored here. But would it shock anyone to see the Chargers, have a neutral game script or even a positive one? It wouldn't shock me. So I think Gordon is a cheap play who has a really nice matchup, actually.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think he's a nice, safe floor, and one of these days he's going to have upside because, I mean, he was the epitome of upside at Wisconsin. I mean, the guy was literally unstoppable. So obviously, different level, but the guy's a great runner. He makes good decisions, so you got to like that.
It's coming. The Gordon monster game is coming.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to give you credit for that when it comes. Maybe it's this week. I will definitely have some Melvin Gordon. And then you mentioned here Keenan Allen and Stevie Johnson. If you're taking one, I know you mentioned in the article, but maybe some people don't like to read. Which guy do you have if you got to take one?
Yeah, I mean, if Xavier Rhodes, who's pretty much a stud cornerback from Minnesota, if he's on Keenan Allen, which he's supposed to see a lot of Allen, or Allen's supposed to see a lot of him, then I think I have to lean Johnson's way. The stack generator kind of likes the Rivers Allen stack, but if I'm stacking any receiver, any Chargers receiver with Phillip Rivers, it would be Stevie Johnson this week. He's getting red zone targets too, which is nice. I mean, he's not typically a red zone guy, so to see that is a boon for his weekly value.
Yeah, and he comes at a nice discount from Keenan Allen too, which certainly helps that decision too. Next up, the New England Gronkowskis against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously, this has been, I don't know, this depends on who you ask. The Steelers have been a great offense too, but I mean, this offense has been absolutely unstoppable in 2 weeks. Tom Brady looks angry out there, which is not good for any opposing defense, but that's good for DFS. So Julian Edelman saw 19 targets last week. Obviously, we're not going to see that sort of level again, probably. But we know this is a team that likes to put their foot on the gas and, just pound the other team. And it seems like this is Jaguars offense, which it was only 1 week, but they look like a competent enough offense that they should be able to at least compete in this game. I certainly don't think that they have a chance to win this game. It's a 2-touchdown spread, but I think that they could be able to keep this one close enough that guys like Gronk and Edelman and Tom Brady get their value before, it's a 52-point game.
Yeah, I think sometimes daily fantasy players we might be afraid of success. Like we see a line this crazy, Patriots are projected for 31 points. You don't see that very often, and we say, oh God, can I go in on Edelman? Can I go in on Gronk or Brady because they're just going to get a lead and bench them, or they're just going to get a lead and run the ball, and they're not going to get any second half. But they're gonna pile up points somehow, right?
Yep.
So it just don't be afraid of a team that's supposed to do well. Okay, yeah. Basically is the lesson here. The stack generator loves the Brady, Gronk, Edelman stack, 50.7 fantasy points for those three. And honestly, I mean, as you know, that's probably like somewhere near their floor.
Yeah, that's a very conservative estimate right there.
So yeah, I mean, if they combine for like 80, I wouldn't be shocked here. And then on the Jag side of the ball, I think we'll get to Allen Robinson in a second, but T.J. Yeldon is playing almost every snap in that backfield with Denard Robinson out with a knee injury, and so he's going to be in there in a game that Jacksonville, in which Jacksonville could run a lot of offensive plays. So I'm not necessarily saying that you're playing Yeldon because he's going to get 20 carries for 100 yards, but he could get 20 touches, and that's really nice at his price. And then Allen Robinson going crazy last week. I think that the narrative of like Belichick shuts down the best weapon on the other team is a little overblown, and I think Allen Robinson has the sort of ability to overcome that. I mean, I know we saw like T.Y. Hilton continually get shut down every time the Patriots play the Colts, but Allen Robinson is not T.Y. Hilton. He's a big, strong guy who can outmuscle guys, who can outrun them. I think that he kind of transcends that narrative, and I have him in a bunch of tournament lineups.
Yeah, and that's a really good point there about it, because I mean a lot of DFS players, the casual gamer, they look at numbers. You don't look at size. You don't realize that T.Y. Hilton's a small slot type receiver, and I mean Allen Robinson, he's a beast. I mean I'm a pretty big guy, and he's a lot bigger than I am. So, but yeah, the Patriots. One more thing I want to ask you here about this one. You mentioned the maddening running back situation, of course. So LeGarrette Blount, obviously we've seen him be the guy that stepped in the game where they do get up 3-4 touchdowns and just pound the rock. And I mean, he'd be the one player in the NFL I wouldn't want to try to tackle. So you got LeGarrette Blount, you got Dion Lewis, who's been a popular play. Obviously, he's evolved in the pass game, and he's been seeing quite a few snaps as well. Are you a believer that Blount gets enough of a bump in volume that he's worth playing this week, or is it still Dion Lewis, or is it just play the passing game and stay away?
In cash, it's hands off the Patriots backfield for cash games. I think that Blunt's price on DraftKings is so appealing that it's worth just a plug and play in GPPs, because just the chance, like you said, that they get a big lead, and typically, if we judge our decisions on past usage, typically, they use Blount to bleed the clock, and he does a really good job of it, and gains a lot of yards and scores a lot of touchdowns in that capacity, in that role. So he played. I think he played 7 snaps last week. That's concerning, but that the plan against Buffalo was not to run straight into that brick wall of a front seven. It was to exploit that secondary, and they did that. So this could be different. The Jaguars' run defense is fine. It's not bad. It's not good. But I like Blount as a GPP play.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good call. I mean, we did see a big, strong runner, Jonas Gray. One game he came out over 200 yards, 4 touchdowns, kind of out of nowhere. So certainly you're not expecting a type of performance like that. But like you said, Blount definitely a key in a matchup like this late in the game if it gets out of hand.
Yeah.
Next one's going to be an interesting one. We've got the Jets and the Eagles. We've got the Eagles offense that, frustrating is a kind way to put it, what they've been the first few weeks. So obviously we expect they can't get much worse. They're going to improve. It's a Jets offense that's got Eric Decker, Chris Ivory, both questionable this week. And if Eric Decker, you mentioned here, if Eric Decker was going to play, you'd love him. Brandon Marshall's been great. He's got a phenomenal matchup here. And Ryan Fitzpatrick is really cheap, and he's a guy I keep going back and forth on whether I feel okay about him in cash games, especially with the Decker situation. If not, but it's a great matchup. Brandon Marshall, a nice compliment to him. So what's your take on this? Is Fitzpatrick a cash game play for you? Are you on the fence too, or is he GPP only?
If Decker was at full strength and played, I think I would lean yes, Fitzpatrick as a cash game option. But and we'll get to this guy next. But I actually like Nick Foles in cash better than I do Fitzpatrick. But I think that he still has a high floor, just like we saw last week. Against the Colts. And yeah, Philadelphia's offense is at this point almost hands off. I mean, you can't play Bradford, you can't possibly play Murray with the hamstring tweak, and 21 carries for 11 yards, whatever he has. Jordan Matthews, I guess, is a guy you could plug in and just hope for what happened last week. Basically, he just is a creature of volume, and he does a lot with the ball once he catches it. But other than that, I just can't play any Eagles.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, it's just one of the better offensive lines in the game last year, and then now all of a sudden you put it very well here. The leakiest offensive line in the NFL, and I mean that pretty much sums it up. They've been it's been bad, the kind of pressure you're seeing. I mean, you're seeing Murray get hit as soon as he's getting the ball. It's bad back there.
It's awful. By the way, if Chris Ivory is declared out and he's a game time decision, I really like Bilal Powell. I think he's available for the minimum on at least one site, and we saw last week, when Ivory came out of the game, Powell got all the snaps. I think that Powell has a high floor and a high ceiling if Ivory is out in a game in which the Jets are favored by 3. So it's something to really watch for in the morning.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, I mean it's been a similar number of touches and snaps between those two guys in the first 2 weeks with different kind of game scripts each game. So like you said, Bilal Powell does have a high floor. He's been getting a lot of touches anyway. So next up, the Rams and the Steelers. This is one that I know I'm looking forward to, and at least from a DFS perspective. You got Antonio Brown, you got Le'Veon Bell, Ben Roethlisberger. I think Keith Miller, the guy that probably kind of takes the biggest hit, but I've even seen people talking about how they think that Bell coming back from his suspension is going to take things away from Antonio Brown. I think Antonio Brown's going to get what he's going to get because it's been proven no one can stop the guy, and until we see anything different, we kind of mentioned it earlier, he's your safest wide receiver bet. Easily, he's got a huge high floor, and I feel like this is one of the few running back wide receiver duos that you can target in the same lineup and feel good about it, because even in a tough matchup against the Rams front seven, which numbers-wise they haven't been good, but I'm a believer they're better than what they've done. I mean, Bell's such a big factor in the passing game that it really doesn't matter the matchup, if you ask me.
Yeah. I mean, we saw last year some games where he was shut down on the ground, but still had a fantastic game because of 5, 6, 7 receptions and the things that he can do with the ball, in space, which the Steelers are really good at getting him in space. The Rams front seven is probably not terrible, but they were shredded last week by Washington. I mean, Washington wasn't even pretending to throw. I mean, there was not even. They just said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put 2 tight ends out there, and we're going to slam it in your face, and here you go. And the Washington just ripped off chunk plays against that Rams defense. So maybe Bell can go on the ground and through the air in this one. I think he's a tremendous play, and I wouldn't be freaked out. I see some things on Twitter about, is he in shape? Is he like going to get with the game, the flow of the game? This is his first game. Don't worry about it. Just play him.
Yeah, if you've ever seen Le'Veon Bell not in pads, I mean, you don't have to worry about this if this man is in shape. I mean, the guy, he's a terrifying looking guy. I mean, I'm certainly not concerned about that.
Yeah.
On the Rams side, you mentioned Nick Foles as a viable cash game option because he is cheap. This game, essentially a pick 'em, one of the higher totals in the weekend. you know the Steelers are going to score points. I mean, I imagine Armageddon is more likely to happen this week. The world coming to an absolute end and the Steelers not putting up, 24, 28, even 30 points in this one. So you're going to need to score. Probably going to be behind if you ask me. I'm still kind of surprised this is a pick 'em. So Nick Foles, by sheer volume alone, has got to be a decent play.
Yeah, and the Steelers through 2 games, 75% of the yards that have been gained against them have been through the air. Granted, last week was a blowout, and the Niners basically couldn't run the ball for the final 3 quarters of that game. But the Steelers secondary is not just kind of bad; it's really awful. So I think Foles is something of a lock for a lot of yardage. We just need that. We just need those 2 touchdowns. We just need those 2 touchdown passes, and he's like a rock solid cash game option to me. I would just be baffled if he doesn't throw for 270 yards in this game, and I wouldn't be shocked at all if he goes well over 300. I think that the yardage is there. It's just a matter of touchdowns.
Yeah, and it's not like the volume passing game is new to Nick Foles, because at Arizona, that's literally the only thing that they did is just pass the ball 50 times a game. So certainly something that's he's comfortable with, and that's what we expect out of this game. So I'm with you there. I like Nick Foles as a nice volume play. Titans and the Colts. This one, I mean, you hate to say must win early in the season, but for an 0-2 Colts team facing a division rival, they haven't looked good on offense at all. They haven't been able to run the ball. Passing game seems like it looks great in fourth quarters of games, and that's about it. But, I mean, Andrew Luck and this offense, they're too talented to continue to struggle this way. So, and I'm a believer the Jets defense just really might be that good. I mean, they forced 10 turnovers first 2 weeks. Obviously, it's completely unsustainable. But at the same time, there's a lot of weapons in this Colts offense. You got Dwayne Allen out now, so you got Coby Fleener kind of stepping in. And obviously Andrew Luck has plenty of rapport with Coby Fleener. I mean, he played with him for years at Stanford as well. So I'm a believer this is going to be a huge bounce-back game for Luck. They need to win this game, and this is not a great Titans defense either.
No. The Titans, I actually think, showed last week that they could be a really exploitable defense. And yeah, I mean, with Dwayne Allen out, Coby Fleener's splits when Allen is out are kind of nutty. I mean, I forget exactly what they are, but I mean, he gets lots of targets, catches lots of passes, scores touchdowns. That was the difference between 2013 and 2014 for Fleener, where it was the touchdown scoring. He just with Allen in there, Allen is the red zone guy. Red zone tight end, but with him out, Fleener gets more looks down in the paint. So Fleener's super cheap on a lot of sites. I'm gonna have a lot of Fleener, and I don't think it's nuts to have Fleener and Moncrief in the same lineup. I mean, I think Andrew Luck is gonna shred this Tennessee defense, this secondary, and Luck, after 2 really horrible performances, might be some sort of contrarian play at this point, because he's burned a lot of people, a lot of DFSers through 2 weeks. So I wouldn't be surprised if he has fairly low ownership. I'm not saying low ownership, but for Andrew Luck, I think we'll see some surprising numbers.
Yeah, lower than it rightfully ever should be for a player of his caliber. And you mentioned here Frank Gore. Titans might have been the best defense to target last year with running backs. I mean, they were absolutely terrible against the run. Haven't been much better here. You mentioned Frank Gore looks good. I mean, much better against the Jets, and did fumble at the goal line. That hurts, and I mean, that was a lot of the reason why they ended up losing the game even. But Frank he's their guy. They didn't bring him in to give up on him this quickly. He's going to continue, like you mentioned in your article here. He's going to continue to get his touches, and this could be a nice bounce back week for him as well, because if I'm an opposing defense, my target, no matter what, is going to be to try to slow down Andrew Luck in the passing game, which should open up plenty of opportunities for Frank Gore in a good matchup.
Yeah, and Tennessee is allowing 4.7 yards per carry. I think Gore is a kind of a safe play. As surprising as it might be, because he's just he vanished in week 1 from due mostly to an injury, and then week 2 it could have been really nice and it wasn't. But I have him in cash game lineups this week, and I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, I don't blame you there. And then the The Titans side, anybody you're looking at here? Are you looking at Mariota as a GPP option? Are you pairing him with anybody?
Yeah, no, I don't think I'm pairing him with anybody, but I do. I was really surprised. I don't know about you, but I was really surprised to see that he scored 20 fantasy points last week.
Yeah.
Every time Red Zone flashed to the Titans Browns game, Mariota was throwing passes that were tipped and almost picked, and he's sacked and fumbling, and I'm like, oh, well, he must have had a disastrous week. 20 points, and he didn't rush once again, which is a little concerning for his value. I mean, coming into the season, I was really hoping we would see him have some design runs, be more apt to scramble when his first or second read wasn't there. But that's not the case. I think with the presumption that the Colts will score a lot of points in this game, they're projected for 24.5, which is it's not incredibly high, but it's pretty good. I think that Mariota makes a nice correlation play with a guy like Moncrief or a guy like Fleener.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense there. And like you mentioned there, Price is QB 20 on DraftKings, so he certainly has a lot of upside due to his price tag there. Arizona Cardinals and the San Francisco 49ers here. 49ers defense, secondary, whatever you want to call it. I mean, these guys might not deserve to wear 49ers uniforms at this point because, I mean, this is a bad defense. They got absolutely shredded last week, and not going to get any easier for them this week. Carson Palmer's looked incredible for the first couple weeks. Larry Fitzgerald had a huge breakout game. John Brown's a guy who's drawn a bunch of pass interference calls as well. So, I mean, he's been a factor, although not quite so much on the stat sheet. So this is definitely a game that 44-point total, but I would certainly not be surprised to see a lot more points than that in this one.
Yeah, well, Carson Palmer makes for like the ideal cash game quarterback. I mean, he's at home. He's favored by a lot. His team is projected to score 25.5 points. And he's playing a bottom barrel secondary. I don't really know if it gets safer than Palmer this week, and that's including Rodgers, that's including Peyton. He's just super locked in, safe kind of guy. And you mentioned John Brown. Like we were talking about earlier with Melvin Gordon. The John Brown game is coming. I mean, you can see it. Yeah. He's getting lots of deep targets, getting pass interference. Carson Palmer trusts him tremendously. So I keep putting Brown into GPP lineups because I think that he's going to go nuclear. And this is as good a week as any. His home road splits are pretty exaggerated. He's much better at home through. I know. The sample size is small, but he's much better at home than he is away, and so he's in a bunch of my GPP lineups, especially on DraftKings where he's really cheap.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, I mean this literally would be the perfect week for it because obviously when another receiver on your team goes for 3 touchdowns last week, especially a guy with name recognition like Larry Fitzgerald, that's going to be the popular play. I mean, he's going to be way higher owned than John Brown, whether he should be or not. All of that, I mean, obviously depending on your opinion, but I'm with you there. I think that the Palmer John Brown stack is a good, not contrarian in the sense of Palmer, but contrarian in the sense that people are going to be pairing Fitz with him all day long. And it's going to be way more highly owned in tournaments this week.
Yeah, definitely.
On the 49ers side, anybody you're looking at, Carlos Hyde, had an injury last week, was great in week 1, but it wasn't necessarily his fault last week that they couldn't get it going because, I mean, they don't have weapons.
No, the only saving grace I think with Hyde is that Reggie Bush is not expected to play this week, so once again Hyde could see a lot of third down action, which like Latavius Murray gives him a slightly higher floor. I just don't really see much reason to use Hyde when there are more appealing plays in his price range. Bolden saw 10 targets last week, which I'm actually kind of surprised it wasn't more because the Niners were in, disaster comeback mode for the better part of 3 quarters. Yeah. So I guess Bolden at his price is somewhat appealing, but I don't know. I don't even know if I have 149er in the lineup this week. They're projected for 18.5 points. I just don't know how you can get excited.
Yeah, and someone's going to end up with Patrick Peterson on him too, though. So that's not an enviable spot for any of them. Dolphins and the Bills, 44-point total here. Dolphins a small favorite here, and of course one of your favorite players, Ty God Taylor here. Aside from the 5 interceptions, which we can just go ahead and pretend like we didn't see that. That was a game script kind of thing. He was forced to try to make plays, with not a lot of weapons, because he doesn't have a ton of weapons in the passing game. And, overall points-wise, you kind of look past the interception thing and you see he's had a great floor the past couple weeks. He's been productive from a DFS standpoint, and even almost brought this team back last week against the Patriots when they were pretty much out and dead in that game. So I know you're looking at him as a play, and you mentioned here you've got him as a cash game play, and I mean it's hard to argue with that because he's had a nice high floor.
Yeah, I mean he's given you over 40 yards rushing 2 weeks in a row. I don't think there's anything to say that that's fluky. I mean, is he going to rush for 40 yards every week? No, but I think that's sort of near his rushing floor, and I don't think we've seen his rushing upside yet. Last week, he was not good from a real football standpoint. He was not good. Okay, we know that. Yeah. But I think that he surprised me and a lot of people by still putting up. What did he put? 29 fantasy points despite 3 picks. I mentioned in the article, the Slate breakdown, for rushing quarterbacks, for kind of dual threat quarterbacks, the .60 fantasy points per drop back is like the magic number. Russell Wilson, hit that last year, and he's beyond that right now. I know 2 weeks. I know it's gonna come down, but I still like him in cash games.
Yeah, and it makes sense. And then a guy that you mentioned here, you said looks spry, LaShawn McCoy. Once again, like he was last year, a frustrating play because we saw, pretty much any and every Chris Polk, didn't matter who the backup was. You get LaShawn McCoy, didn't matter if it was a 98-yard run down to the 1-yard line. It's almost just a kind of a given that he's not going to get the goal line work. And he did see a couple goal line touches last week, ended up not getting in, and I think he had one called back in week 1 as well. Yeah. But he looked good. He looked like the kind of guy we were expecting at Buffalo, where he was involved in the pass game, had 3 catches, had almost 100 total yards, which obviously at his current price, you need more than that. You need him to get in the end zone or, get 150 type of yards. But he's a guy that I just still can't find myself rostering.
Yeah, me neither. That lack of goal line opportunity is it's a big hit. It's just a big hit. And but he averaged almost 6 yards a carry last week. I'm not big on like analyzing how players look, but apparently he was he flashed like he did in Philadelphia before he was terrible in Philadelphia. Yeah. So I think that there's some hope there, but I could not convince myself to put him in cash game lineups.
No, not for me either. And then of course on the opposite side we saw Buffalo's secondary. As you mentioned here, eaten alive in week 2, and that's a kind way to put it because it was even worse than that. But yeah. You got Jarvis Landry here, who's been, I won't say a target monster, but he's seen quite a few looks. He's been adequate. He's been successful over the first 2 weeks. And Ryan Tannehill, terrible week. We'll say DFS-wise, terrible week 1. And a much better week 2, but also that was kind of a game script type of thing. So, what's your take here on the Dolphins side? Are you on the Landry Tannehill duo, or just Landry, or what are you looking at?
Yeah, more just Landry, but I get the appeal of a Tannehill Landry stack. So Landry is that sort of shifty underneath kind of receiver that Edelman is, and Edelman just destroyed that Buffalo secondary. I'm not saying that they're identical players, but they're similar enough to me to say that Landry could be that sort of be in that formula. Be a guy who catches 8 or 10 balls. So from a PPR perspective, I think he could be tremendous this week. And the Dolphins are not going to be able to run. I mean, they just won't. The Buffalo run defense is good. And Lamar Miller's banged up, And even if Lamar Miller was healthy, could he run again? I don't know. I don't think so. So yeah, Landry. I have a lot of Landry this week.
Yeah, and rightfully so. And then a team that you mentioned here, you won't have a lot of, and I'm glad for your sake, for your bankroll's sake, for everything for you that you won't, and most people shouldn't. I have 0 of them. I've and as you put it here, PPR Dynamo, Matt Forte, certainly a guy that you consider because game script kind of thing. You got Jimmy Clausen throwing, you got no Alshon Jeffrey. So I mean, if you're going to be throwing the ball, you've got Eddie Royal, you've got Marquez Wilson, you've got Matt Forte. I mean, there's no option, so you assume there's going to be volume for Matt Forte, but I just don't know if I can do it. This Seattle defense 0-2 going home. Cam Chancellor is back. Everything's shaping up for the Bears to just get mauled in this game.
Yeah, this is honestly for the Seahawks and the Bears, but mostly the Seahawks. This is like narrative apocalypse. Okay, I mean, you have Chancellor back. They're 0-2. There's turmoil. Jimmy Graham is complaining about his role. He hates it there. This and that. This is just shaping up to be a debacle of a game on the Chicago side. I'm not rostering any Bears. I just don't know how you. I don't know how you can. And I don't. I loathe paying up for defenses, but it's really hard not to have a lot of Seahawks defense this week. It just is. I think that when we look for defenses, we look for defenses at home, favored, playing against quarterbacks who are inaccurate, and that's what we have here. And a guy, they're going to have to throw a lot, against this Seahawks defense. So, I'm paying up. I'm paying up for Seattle.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I feel bad. I mean, I don't have any allegiances to the Bears or any of their players, and I don't know any of them, but I feel bad for them and their families to have to watch this game. And I certainly won't be watching it. I'll just watch my Seattle defense points just rack up with their pick sixes and everything else. And I mean, this is an absolutely terrifying matchup. I'm with you there. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't come near the 14 points, honestly. Like, if they score a touchdown, good for them. They should be proud of that because it's as far as NFL games go, this might be the biggest mismatch defense-offense we've seen in a long time.
In a long time, yeah.
Yeah, so, Seahawks side, obviously the news coming out yesterday from everyone's favorite Pete Carroll saying that all of a sudden Lynch, the injury he sustained against the Packers, which wasn't really ever documented. No one really talked about an injury. I think he just struggled. Maybe he did just struggle. Maybe he's not injured. And so if he didn't play, obviously Fred Jackson takes on a bigger load. If he's going to play, you have to love him against this terrible defense and perfect game script, all the reasons we've mentioned, huge spread, etc. But you had a good point on something you noticed about Marshawn Lynch, though.
Yeah, it was. I retweeted. I think it was a beat reporter for the Seahawks saying that, hey everybody, they've listed Marshawn Lynch as questionable many times over the past 2.5 seasons, and he's always played when listed as questionable. I'm not freaking out too much. I still don't think that you can have him in your lineups. I was telling Justin, I was telling you, I have a lot of Lynch in Thursday games that kicked off Thursday night. So, oh well. Hopefully he plays and gets more than like three snaps. But the stack generator has the Russell Wilson Lynch stack as the top quarterback running back stack of the week of the week. Now, it's not ideal to stack quarterbacks and running backs, but with with the game script the way it is, and with 29.25 points, Seahawks projected for that amount, I think that it's somewhat reasonable to have that stack. I did look into it a little bit after the fact, and it seems that Russell Wilson's biggest games of his career have coincided with kind of pedestrian performances for Lynch, and vice versa. So, in hindsight, I would avoid that stack. I would play one of the other, but not both.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, if you had to play gun to your head, you got to play one quarterback running back duo. Makes sense that it'll be that one, but like you said, in this game, I just don't see any scenario where this game's close. And if Marshawn Lynch is less than 100%, I don't see any way that we see him in the second half, even if he does play the first half, if this is a 3-touchdown game. So, yeah. Definitely a very opposite of safe play, whatever word you want to use. It's not a good scenario now.
Iffy, very iffy.
Yeah, if this was a close game, then maybe, but it's brutal. The Lions against the Broncos in this one. Speaking of brutal, the Detroit Lions as a whole look just terrible. I mean, that first half against San Diego, week 1, They looked good on defense and offense. Since then, they've looked like a bottom feeder type of team across the board. Broncos pass defense looks absolutely phenomenal. Looks like no one's going to be able to pass on them. Obviously, you've got now Matt Stafford injured. You've got just this whole offense. I mean, the running game got shut down last week. If you don't have anyone to throw the ball to Calvin Johnson, he's not going to get the ball to himself. So the 44.5 point total isn't bad, 20.75 points for the Lions, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them score less than that, though.
Oh yeah, I didn't really understand that too much. That total. Yeah, you mentioned the Denver secondary. I mean, that Denver secondary is shaping up to be like a no go. Like I'm not starting my quarterbacks or receivers against Denver. That's why I mentioned in the article. I actually think that Eric Ebron is more than just like a GPP throw in this week, because he's been very involved, and Stafford is going to have to throw, and he's going to have to throw it to somebody. And Ebron gets a matchup against a Denver defense that last year gave up a bunch of production to opposing tight ends, and with Tate and Calvin having to contend with those corners, it's like what I mentioned with Gilmore in Baltimore. I think you could have a similar situation here. So I really like Ebron as with a correlation play with Peyton, or with Emmanuel Sanders or Demaryius Thomas. I mean, those Denver receivers, they're going to eat. They're going to eat against this Detroit secondary that gave up 22 catches to Chargers receivers in Week 1. I think we could see something similar here.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly there's a lot more talent in this receiving core for Denver than what we saw with San Diego. And I mean, it's Keenan Allen and essentially some role player types. So obviously Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, great plays this week. I'm a huge fan of Demaryius, especially. I mean, even when the day comes that Peyton Manning isn't throwing the ball down the field, which, I mean, everyone gave up after Week 1. He looked fine last week. And I'm a big believer, and I feel like Demaryius' price is much, much lower than it rightfully should be as an elite receiver with, at least a somewhat elite quarterback in a great matchup. So I have a ton of Demaryius Thomas this week.
Me too. I have him and Sanders in a lot of spots. Yeah.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense there. And then moving on to the Monday night game, last game of the week, highest total, 49 points. I'm a little bit surprised on the highest total because, you've got, of course, a very potent Packers offense. Chiefs are a solid defense. I mean, they're a good defense in this one. They're 21 point total for them, 28 for the Packers. Obviously, you've got Devontae Adams, Randall Cobb. Randall Cobb finally had his he looked last week like what he looked like last year. Obviously, Week 1, different scenario. But we're looking forward towards this week where you've got Travis Kelce seemingly underpriced on most sites. We saw him have a breakout week 1. We didn't have to wait, the rest of our lives like we thought we were going to have to for that big performance. And, this is a Green Bay defense that it's not great. I mean, they got gashed on the ground 2 weeks ago. Last week, injury or not, whatever it may have been with Marshawn Lynch, I think a lot of it was it's a rivalry now with those two, and they got up for that game. And I think that Jamal Charles could be a guy that's kind of interesting in this game too. But what's your take? Because obviously you got Eddie Lacy banged up too, so it could be the James Stark show. And he's, as far as backups go, I mean, he might be the most consistent running back that you can rely on him as a backup.
Yeah, I mentioned in the breakdown, if you're insistent on playing Lacy, and I don't get that too much, but you can always on DraftKings, you can edit your lineups, and you can throw Starks in there if he sits, which it doesn't look like he will. But that's one option you might have, but I don't think I have any Eddie Lacy this week. You mentioned Jamal. I think Jamal is like, I mean, it's basically like passe now to be like, Jamal Charles is a good player because he's always a really good play. And you mentioned, I mean, Matt Forte gouged this Green Bay defense in Week 1, and they struggled to cover. He caught 5 passes, and if you watched the game, he was matched up against linebackers who just couldn't keep up. And if they can't keep up with Forte, they can't keep up with Jamal. So I think that Jamal makes for one of the safer cash game running backs this week in a week that's terrible for cash game running backs. Okay, yeah. I mean, so he might be like the one exception. And you mentioned Kelce. Kelce's price is still kind of laughably low on a few sites out there. Beyond that, Daily Fantasy Cafe lists him his cafe value is one of the higher values this week. The Kansas City passing game has to filter through someone, and I think that Kelsey is as good a guess or an option as anyone. He's still running a lot of routes, and that's something we didn't see last year. So that's good. I actually have Kelsey as a cash game play as well.
Yeah, and I mean, like we said, it's about time they realize what they had in Travis Kelce, and they're getting him involved. So I'm expecting big things moving forward. And like you said, take advantage of that price while we can, because it shouldn't be and probably won't be this low for much longer either. So.
No.
All right, thanks for hanging out with us here. Good luck in week 3. Check us out at dailyfantasycafe.com. He is at CD Carter, and we'll see you guys on week 4.